Welcome to Convoys with NIFA, where we teach, inform, expose, learn, and discuss issues related to our communities for sustainable community development. I am Hanifa Kut, your host.
Stay tuned. So, today's focus is going to be on conflict, peace, and the environment. We know very well the environment ultimately affects our lives as human beings, and therefore we should ensure that we take care of the environment the best way possible so that we don't frustrate our future. In this episode, you're also going to look a bit into the influence of conflict on climate change, or rather the way climate change actually affects conflict. Yeah. So first of all, we'll jump into the definitions. So we're going to define what peace is, and we're going to define what conflict is, and we're going to define the environment. So the environment, according to MCA Act,
includes the physical factors of the surroundings of human beings, including land, water, atmosphere, climate, sound, odor, taste, the biological factors of animals and plants, and the social factors of aesthetics, and includes both the natural and the built environment.
And then peace is a state of security or order within a community. It can also be defined as
a stress-free state of security and calmness that comes when there is no strife.
And now to conflict. Conflict can simply be defined as
a serious disagreement with opposing opinions or principles and can escalate to war.
So, how is peace, conflict, and the environment interrelated? Connections between environmental issues are many and very complex. And for starters, when we talk about environmental degradation, in most cases, we don't hear about the part in which conflict plays in environmental degradation. But in this episode, we are going to actually see how conflict leads to environmental degradation. In all honesty, conflict can lead to environmental degradation both directly and indirectly. During conflict, different things happen that can ultimately lead to environmental degradation. When there's an unrest, there are cases of exploitation of resources or even indiscriminate use of the available resources in the environment. For example, deforestation can easily happen when a conflict is happening because no one is going to focus on what is happening at that given point, but rather focus on the given conflict that is ongoing. So you find that people can easily decide to exploit resources that are available because no one cares, or rather no one is looking into the environmental issues at stake, but focusing on ensuring that the given conflict is actually resolved. A very good example that we can look at is the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has had several conflicts occasionally. And during the time of conflict, there was a reported case of deforestation. And mind you, by the way, Congo has a very high, is very rich in biodiversity. So for it to be recorded that deforestation actually happens, it had to be to an extent in which it could be seen, and this was fueled because at that given point they were experiencing conflict and no one was necessarily focusing on the given state of the environment. There is also a lot of diversion of resources and capacity from environmental governance during conflict. This is quite obvious. During conflict, all the focus all through is ensuring that the conflict ends. While this focus is redirected, there can be instances of neglect of the environment or further degradation of the same. For example, when we focus on conflict resolution, other services might be forgotten or rather sidelined, such as waste management. The ripple effect is when you don't manage your waste, you ultimately lead to contamination of the environment and the pollution of the given environment. And when you pollute your environment, the people will be affected in the long run, you see. So there will be health issues that come about because of the contamination of the environment, and there will be destruction of the environment because of the different types of waste that have been released to the given environment, because no one is going to be focusing on what is happening at that specific time, and everyone is going to be focusing on, oh, how can we stop the conflict, not remembering that post conflict we will need people to be in their best, to be okay, to be healthy, in order to rebuild from the conflict that has been happening. And that will mean that everything will go and everything will start from the ground. Worst case scenario, if during the conflict the environment got destroyed to an extreme level. In some given instances, there are migration of people from the hotspots where the conflict is actually happening to a different area. Some people even end up being refugees because of conflict. And when people move to specific regions, you find that the population might be very high, and the carrying capacity, the given resources that are available in that given area may be limited. So you find that the resources that are available end up being overexploited because of the movement to the given region. And this ultimately destroys the given environment, especially if it is not properly managed, and the movement, the migration, the displacement happened without prior plan to provide for the given population at hand. Even worse, in some population, some refugee migration population and the movement, cases have been seen in which, in order to create space and land for provision of resources, provision for livelihood, and creation of space, there have been cases of deforestation in order to create land to resettle people. So you find in the given process, we end up cutting very many trees, not considering the type of impact it might have on our environment or even on our climate, and destroying the environment, of course, to help people, but in the process, you see the ripple effect of conflict bringing about extreme changes on the given environment. During armed conflict too, weapons of mass destruction have expanded areas of destruction, and these areas can even affect environmental resources or resources that people end up depending on as collateral damage. And just looking at what is happening presently, the Ukraine war, especially if the Ukraine war, especially around its power plants, could trigger some lasting radioactive contamination in the given area. And if that contamination happens in the given area, that means the given resources and the environment of that specific area is going to be destroyed, contaminated, and polluted. So because of a war that is happening, because of a conflict that is happening, you see that in the long run, there can be very extreme repercussions that will affect the area, the people, and the place might actually be inhabitable, if anything, because of the radioactive waves that could be left in the given region. In its complexity, while conflict has been seen to actually lead to environmental degradation, the environment, on the other hand, has also been seen to lead to some of the conflicts that are present in our communities and our societies. So it is not a one-way thing. Both sides actually affect each other in different measures. So natural resources have been seen as to be a source of contention in 4 global crises and conflicts that happened between 2014 to 2018 as recorded. And It is safe to say that both abundance of resources and limited resources actually lead to conflict, which is crazy. Someone might think just the degradation of the environment and the limits, the limited availability of resources in the environment might be the only causes to the conflict. But in reality, conflict can be brought about even by abundance of resources.
A case in point,
causing the crisis in the DRC? Well, the honest answer is it's complicated. Mineral-rich eastern regions like Ituri, South and North Kivu, and Maniema produce global supplies of cobalt, the metal used in batteries which power our tech devices. The area also has deposits of titanium, copper, diamonds, and gold. For more than 30 years, this area has been at the center of proxy wars and violent exploitation. In early 2022, Belgian gold dealer Alan Goetz was sanctioned by the United States government for allegedly smuggling hundreds of millions of dollars worth of gold from the DRC. The US said the illicit movement of gold provides revenue to armed groups that threaten the peace, security, and stability of the DRC. Alan Goetz denied the allegations against him, but a battle for the nation's vast mineral wealth is not the only factor at play.
And while direct linkages are sometimes not drawn, especially in the cases of climate change, some can actually be seen to cause conflict directly, especially when it relates to the environment and not to climate change as such. Though climate change and environmental degradation have actually been seen to serve as a threat multiplier of conflict. So among the environmental resources, land is often a source of contention, especially in places like Africa, leave alone Africa, even in Kenya. In instances where access and ownership and distribution is in question, you find that there are cases of conflict that arise just to get the access to the given resource, or to get access or to use the given resource that is available, whether it is limited or abundant. The crazy and the interesting thing about environmental resources, while I might think it's limited to me, another person, looking at another person's resource or land, I might think the person has too much and I'd want to have access. And if it's such a case scenario, this can actually lead to conflict. I almost said the worst part. But interesting enough, some of these conflicts, especially on land resources in Africa, can be traced way back to colonial periods. And you find that there are cases in which conflicts arise in order to gain access to resources and to land because of what is claimed, quote unquote, as historical injustices. In areas of abundance of resources, conflicts can also arise, especially when ownership is in question. The resources might be here, the land might be here, and I can have a very big piece of land. But if I own this piece of land and my neighbor claims that the piece of land belongs to him or her just because I have a specific mineral in it, or just because my land is fertile, you see, like in my abundance, I can still have conflict with another person. So it's not necessarily because the other person is limited. The other person can even have pieces of land. Like in the cases of land grabbing, some of the people who grab land, which cause conflicts, don't grab land because they don't want. They grab land because they want some more of the given land. So in line with the same, so also environmental resources have been seen to help fuel the conflict, especially when it has been weaponized and strangled productivity of an enemy. Let's say I know very well a specific person depends on a specific environmental resource to get going, but I decide to actually capture the given environmental resource so that the other person cannot get access to it. And this process will actually lead to conflict. Just a very small example is maybe the access of let's say I am in an area in which there are very many conflicts related maybe even to brought about by cattle rustling or enmity between different communities, but we share a specific water point, and the water point that we actually share, one community decides to take hold of it or get hold of it. It will frustrate the other side's ability to actually access this resource in order to get going. And considering our community, this community might be depending on this as source of livelihood, as water for their cattle, having conflict in between and ensuring that this water point can't be accessed will limit the success of the other community, and it will also still lead to more conflict because of the limitations brought about. In line with the same, looking at climate change, it has been reported on various occasions that conflict is being fueled by climate change. Migration due to climate change can lead to friction where the people resettle, and there is also environmental degradation or limited access to resources, which can also lead to conflict, especially when seeking access to the then available limited resources. It further escalates the conflict in already unstable regions. For example, in central Mali, terrorist groups took advantage of growing tensions between farmers and pastoralists and herders, and decided to recruit members from the pastoral communities to join the terrorist groups. And you see, if the terrorist groups are involved in conflict, and then they use the climate change situation to actually gain access to more people, it continues to increase the conflict in the given region. Because if we have many people, and the more the people that join the group, the more they can go into the conflict and cause more damage. Just looking into the environmental driven conflict with a mix of climate change and additional repercussions, my research in Laikipia North actually opened my eyes to how climate change, if you include environmental issues, can actually bring about conflict. For a period of time, there was a long dry spell and there was no rain within the region, especially Laikipia North in Kenya, that is. And there were cases of moving into people's lands and all that. And just because there were already underlying issues such as land ownership issues, the conflict escalated. Of course, the blame was put on climate change, which I don't refuse. The resources had been depleted, the lands were dry. So people used this as an excuse to actually take their cattle to lands claimed to be owned originally to graze because they had resources.
International Crisis Group talked to some of the herders.
When droughts get in, it reaches a point whereby the only place to get pastures and good waters, it is maybe the ranches for white people or for the white settlers. And because there is no other place to graze livestock, it causes conflicts, it causes a fight, and it is really costing even lives of the people. We have lost so many friends, we have lost so many relatives.
There's no simple explanation for the conflict we've seen in this region of Kenya.
But of course, we can't overlook the impact of the climate stresses that we've seen. The impact is that pastoralists searching for water and pasture will be going longer distances. That will bring them into more risk of potential conflict, either with ranches or with other herders or with the farming community.
And during that time, during the period of conflict, no one pays attention to the environment, and then it gets used indiscriminately, destroying it and again causing a potential to conflict in the coming times. Because for an instance, you see a piece of land and there's climate change. So where you're coming from, you've exhausted the pasture. You see somewhere where there's pasture and then you drive all your cattle there. You do overgrazing, which can lead to soil erosion, which can ultimately lead to destruction of that given land. And when the land remains bare, at some given point, it will be degraded, especially when building back, because the resources are required in order to build back the post-conflict economy. However, there's a risk of also over-exploitation of the given resources when we are building back from the conflict, because the community can just decide to jump in and use the resources whichever way in order to recover what was lost. And there lies another risk of actually destroying the environment. Essentially, sustainable resource management is essential when aiming towards maintaining peace. Also, peace is needed to ensure environmental management. Successful climate adaptation is also impossible in the absence of peace. Anyway, a lot about peace, environment, conflict. It's important, very important, to ensure that we're staying in a peaceful community and peaceful environment so that we don't destroy our environmental resources and cause degradation, because human beings and other living beings depend on the environment for sustenance. That's all from me, and thanks for reaching this far. Remember to subscribe, like, and share. Peace.